welcome to the Computer Security Seminar. Today's speaker is Richard Power. He will speak on starting over after a lost decade in search of a bold new vision for cyber security. Richard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm always very happy to be at CERIAS. This is my third visit, my second talk. And actually, this talk is a continuation of the last one. So if you go into the archives, if you're at all interested after this hour, God bless you if you are, you could see some kind of context, some kind of continuity between that talk and this talk. And that talk was kind of based on the theme of a 10-year retrospective from 2006 to 1996. And everything that had happened and hadn't happened in cybersecurity, and the question around which that talk was framed was one step forward, two steps back, or two steps forward, one step back. And this talk is kind of taking it from a different look. It will be looking at it from, say, 1999 to 2009. And so I say the lost decade because, well, I'll get into it in a minute. Basically what we're going to do is go through 50 slides. We're not going to touch, we're just going to pass over most of them, but I want to give them to you so that you have them for your own reference and your own, if you want to go into things in a more granular way, or if you have any questions or comments or things you want to talk to me about, follow up, please. I encourage you to, but you'll have the whole thing, and it goes into various areas. You could drill down into it. It's something that I have been giving for a long time, first with CSI when I worked for the Computer Security Institute, and then with Deloitte when I worked for Deloitte, and now I give it in my work for Carnegie Mellon Scilab, and I update it quarterly, and so the facts and the data change, and also the issues kind of evolve, and some issues go away or become less important or more important over time. And this talk, we're going to touch upon 3 or 4 that I think are very big, and they have nothing to do with bits or bytes. They have nothing to do with any of our particular technologies that we're developing or trying to implement. They have more to do really with human nature and human culture, economy and politics, and where we're going as a civilization, really, and what role we as people interested in cybersecurity and cyber risk have in all of that. So I'm going to skip my bio, because if you're at all interested, you can look it up. And this is a statement, just a brief statement about Carnegie Mellon Scilab, and it's just wonderful to have an association with CERIAS through SPAF, and to also be working for Scilab, because there is nothing more important, and this is one of the few conclusions that I reached a long time ago that has never changed. Academic research into cybersecurity is one of the most important things that we can be doing, most important things that we can be funding, most important things that we can be explaining to people and developing. It's really, really important that research be done, not driven totally by commercial interests. I mean, of course, that's involved in everything we do, but it's vital that cybersecurity research, cyber risk research be done in a context other than the commercial nature, whether it's by technology companies or by people, Beltway bandits and others providing consulting services or other kinds of services. This is just a picture of the research thrusts that we have in our program. Okay, so I always start with this this quote from Chief Seattle, 1854. Since we're going to discuss cybersecurity, let's quote a great war chief of the indigenous peoples of America from 1854. Actually, he was a great peace chief. And in his letter to, he wrote an extraordinary letter to the President of the United States, which was, this is actually a rendering of the content of that letter. It's not a literal translation. The literal translation was done by an army doctor who happened to be in the room at the time. And so it's not we don't have a literal, a very substantive translation of the essence of what he said, but it's that all things are connected. And that man did not weave the web of life, he's merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And as the World Wide Web dawned on us in the 90s, I remembered this quote by Chief Seattle, and I realized that, the oneness of life was about to take, there was about to be another twist in the plot. Because not only were we all connected through the world in which we live and our own biology and our own collective unconscious and everything else, but we were also going to be connected in this new profound way through cyberspace. So I always start here. And people talk about when the first time the astronauts saw the Earth from outer space and the profound effect it had on them, and really the profound effect it had on us as a species to actually see our world for the first time from outer space. And these are some of the quotes of astronauts who have had that experience. And then I always juxtapose that with this picture. Has anybody ever seen this before? You've probably seen it, right? It's Cheswick. It's from Lumeta. It's the mapping of the internet in I think it's about 2002 or something. Yeah, 2001. And Ches said that I could use this image. This is the internet rendered visually. And if you drill down in any one of those points, it's a network of network of network of networks. Like now when they look out into the Hubble, when they look out through the Hubble and they see little dots of light, the little dots of light they're seeing are, billions, literally, of galaxies. One dot of light is like a billion galaxies. It's just a different way of approaching our subject matter, putting it in a context that we don't get to feel it and ruminate about it in. And just a couple of data points from outside of the cyber risk timeline, the things that happened in the 90s through that whole decade that kind of shaped our world, shaped the world of the global economy and the multilateral world that we finally stumbled into in the last year. And these are profound changes. And they also coincided with the World Wide Web linking us together in a vast virtual network. The introduction of the euro, the GATT, NAFTA, the Asian economic crisis was the first time we realized, that when the dominoes start falling in one part of the world, it's going to impact economies across the face of the earth. The collapse of the Soviet Union and other things. And also, last time I was here, I could remind you that radio took 38 years to reach 50 million people, and TV took 13 years to reach 50 million people, and the World Wide Web took 4 years to reach 50 million people, but iPod only took 3 years to reach 50 million people. And Facebook took 2 years to reach 50 million people. Yes?
Do you think that's because the population of the Earth is increasing?
No, but it's a very good point. I think it could certainly be a factor, but I think that there's something else going on in terms of the acceleration of our entry into the information age, what Toffler talked about as the third wave.
Well,
Yeah, please.
well, look at the people who are connected, these 50 million people. Where are they? They are not in the fastest population growing countries.
Well, that's a good point, too.
they're made in the West, and the population did not explode in the West.
That's a good point. Cell phone technology would be an example of a data point that would probably be impacted more by the number of the population,
Yeah.
since it's so widespread.
For example, I don't think we have, I mean, mobile phones are not that popular in Africa, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
And that is the vast majority of the.
it's a good point. Interesting. Thank you both. Okay. So one of the things I do is I've kept a timeline from the early 90s of, at first, it was a timeline of any stories that had to do with cyber risk or cyber crime, that especially stories that had numbers, dollar amounts involved, like dollar losses involved. And it used to be in the 90s, the early 90s and mid-90s, you'd find a story, it would be a rare jewel, and you'd have a little pile of them, and you would share them. Look at this story. See what this illustrates. Now, there are so many stories every day, every week, every month, every year, that I only pick stories out that are interest to me. But so now as an exercise, what I do to keep my timeline going is I say every 30 days, I sit myself down and I cull through everything. And I pick out 5 stories, 10 stories, 15 stories that illustrate something odd I hadn't thought of before, or something interesting, or some problem that's never gone away, or some insightful things. So this is just an exercise of random samplings of 6 weeks of newspaper headlines. The Twitter impact on the Iranian uprising, 12 million minutes, $55 million worth of minutes stole from telecoms, list of U.S. nuclear facilities inadvertently posted on a website, Twitter goes down in China, not accidentally, a water company in California, an insider steals $9 million, a corporate espionage email break-in case zaps electronics industry, financial districts, wireless hackers paradise, air traffic systems vulnerable. This is 6 weeks, May of this year. This is from another month of this year. Goldman Sachs exec accused of bank hack theft. Arlington security guard arrested for hacking the hospital computer and posting a video on YouTube of how he did it. When Michael Jackson died, the internet almost went down. It just shows the profound impact of issues involving confidentiality, integrity, and availability in our society. So when I talked through those historic events of the 90s that kind of shaped our world in terms of the global economy, one thing I've been tracking for a long time is the relationship between the global economy and cyberspace. So you see in the 80s, there were, you think of them as these two separate realms, if you will, two separate realms. And then in the 1990s, they kind of cyberspace, information technology, and the cyberspace that information technology allows us to establish and function in, kind of began interpenetrating with the global economy. But in the 21st century, I argue that they're no longer two spaces, no longer two realms. You cannot separate business anymore from IT. I mean, there is a man who sells fruit on the top of Mount Tamalpais in Mill Valley, California. He's there every day, and it's his most beautiful view of the Pacific. And he doesn't have a computer, and he probably doesn't use a computer in his work. But generally speaking, in our business world today, in the global business environment, you can't separate the two. And so consequently, the risks, oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. So consequently, the risks that were in the 80s that existed for the global economy, competitors, governments conducting espionage to sell secrets for economic and national security advantages, and cyberspace hackers and data theft, those threats are now shared. They're now shared, and economic espionage is no longer something that's done through simply hiring your competitors' smartest people or walking in and stealing a book. It's done. It can be done online, and so these it's become the same space. This is something I went into in depth last time. Lots of false memes that we've disproven over the years about what security problems are or aren't, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. I'll say one thing about 9/11. It was an incredible teaching moment that was completely missed. I mean, it was an incredible teaching moment about what security could really mean, what risk could really mean. It was an opportunity to empower people, to understand more about the world in which they lived, their role in it, and how they could meet the challenges of that world. Instead, basically, people just came away with a sense of fear and distrust. And it really, the way that 9/11 was told as a story, the way that the aftermath of it was played out, really missed an opportunity, and it really actually hurt the cause of security in a lot of ways, because people began to perceive security as a way in which they were being exploited and manipulated somehow instead of empowered. So I want to focus on several. These are the areas that I look at a lot, but I'm only going to touch on a few of them today. Economic espionage and IP theft is an important thing that's really kind of underplayed in the realm of cyber risk and cybersecurity. I argue, and my co-author of Secret Stolen, Fortune Lost argue that from our point of view, most corporate security programs should be based on the threat of economic espionage and intellectual property theft, rather than based on here's our security program and here's how it may meet this range of threats. One of them is including economic espionage and intellectual property theft. But that's always one unless you're in specific economic environments, specific kinds of technology environments, and specific kinds of industries, people don't consider themselves at risk for this, but they really should. And it really should be more central to how we develop security systems, security programs, and address the whole issue. Organized crime in cyberspace, I'm going to touch briefly on that. IT supply chain security. Have any of you looked at that at all? You know what we mean by that? So, in other words, I was at a biotechnology conference, and the biotechnology provider was explaining in great detail their IT, their security, their supply chain security system. Their supply chain security system for all the materials that they were bringing in to make their fertilizer, and their dog food, and their cat food, and the various things that they resold, bioengineered and resold to agriculture in particular, and other things, because they had some problems with poisonous things coming through there and contaminated things coming through their supply chain. And I sat there and I realized, my God, this whole supply chain security system is based on what? It's based on the supply chain, the IT supply chain security. The security of the IT supply chain. It's all based on the assumption that the computer hardware and the computer software is providing integrity, confidentiality, and availability, and can't be tampered with in different ways. And in fact, we already know that there is a lot going on in terms of people putting things in USB drives and in hard disks and in routers and various things at a factory level or even beyond the factory level, and then they go out into operational environments and yield information to bad actors. This is happening. So it's an important issue, but we're not going to go into it much today. Infrastructure attacks is a huge issue. Again, I talked about it a lot last time. Virtualization of security and the security of virtualization. Virtualization is an incredible opportunity. Technologically, it's an incredible opportunity. One of the fundamental problems I run across in talking to people about virtualization, however, is it's mostly being done by people who have no real understanding or grasp of security. So they're literally virtualizing security, and they don't understand what security is. So there are big issues there, and I could go into that some other time, but that's not this talk. Personal cybersecurity we'll touch briefly. But I want to talk a lot about what governance is, the role of the board of directors in cybersecurity, because we did a study in the last couple of years since I've been here, which is pretty interesting. And the issue of sustainability, which most people scratch their heads about and say, what in the world does that have to do with cybersecurity? And this issue of hardware, software, wetware, and mindware, which we'll end with. So I don't know how many of you have followed at all stories about Russian organized crime, Eastern European organized crime. It's not just phishing scams and spam and stuff. There's some serious stuff going on out there, and I actually endorse a heretical view, which I once heard expressed by a senior intelligence official, who said, I consider the threat of organized crime and organized cybercrime greater than the threat of radical terrorists. And in a lot of ways, that's a very, very astute observation, because the motivations are different, and the nature of their organizations are different. And there's a lot going on in that area. The point about it is, when this is an example of most important thing I want to leave you with about thinking, really understanding where we are, and if you really understand where we are, really thinking ahead about where this is going. Because we knew there was a guy back in San Mateo, California, in the late 1990s, and he broke into an online site. It wasn't a big site. It wasn't eBay or Amazon. It was a site selling something on the web. I can't say the nature of the business, but they were selling stuff on the web. He stole 80,000 credit card records from that site. There were firewalls in place. There was secure socket layer encryption in place. If you had a checklist, they would have done pretty well on that checklist. But he got 80,000 credit cards from them. At that time, it would probably have been worth, I think it was, about over $10 million. If the credit card companies had to reissue all those cards, it would have cost about $10 million. He tried to sell his credit cards to an FBI agent. So he was a good hacker, but he wasn't a very good fence. And so he went to jail. The point is, at that time, I was talking about, and some other people were talking about, the issue isn't whether or not it's safe for you to send your credit card, your transaction over the web. Everybody's asking, is it safe to use my credit card on the web? Not the question. The question was, what happens to the aggregate of credit cards in the servers at the other end of that transaction? What happens as they build up? And in fact, after that case, once we got into 2000, 2001, 2003, 2004, there were so many stories every quarter of servers being turned over then finally the TJ Maxx case. How many millions of credit cards are we now talking about in the most recent cases that were turned over in one heist? So we knew all this stuff, and we knew back in the early 90s, we knew as the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union fell that there were going to be a lot of out-of-work KGB agents and others, and there was going to be a serious organized crime problem in Eastern Europe. And so we knew about both of these problems, and yet here they are. And so what could we have done? What could business and government have done? What should they have done? And what risks and threats are we now ignoring that something could be done about, so that we don't end up with threats like these 5-10 years down the line? That's an open question, and mostly today I've come here with questions. I'm going to skip past these. slides because I want to get to some of the, well, let's see. No. I want to make sure we have enough time. Yeah. So, every information security professional, every information security professional, when you talk to them, the Golden Fleece, the holy grail, if they're working in corporate world, is to get into the boardroom. If we can just get into the boardroom and give our presentation, we'll get our plan adopted, and then we'll have an executive mandate, and then honey and milk will flow, and there'll be peace in the land, and everything will be great. The other side of that story is that much of the time, I'm going to choose my words carefully, much of the time when an information security, like a chief security officer or chief information security officer, gets into the boardroom and gets his, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of their valuable time, he finds out often, or he or she finds out often, that they really don't want to hear what you have to say. I mean, they're willing to endorse some plan, as long as it's reasonable and as long as you can give them return on investment, which is, of course, ridiculous, because when was the last time you had to offer a return on investment on the sprinkler system in a building? You don't have to. It's a threat that needs to be dealt with. And that's the problem with this kind of thinking that says, well, you have to cost justify this kind of security, basic, fundamental information security. But anyway, they don't want to hear about what's really wrong in their enterprise. Because if they are told what's really wrong in their enterprise, they might have to do something about it. And if they don't do something about it, they might have liability. Or if they do something and they don't do enough, they might have liability. So it's really kind of Alice in Wonderland sometimes when you get into the boardroom. And I'll give you a couple of examples of governance mentality that allowed us to get where we are. There was a security assessment done of a major company, and I asked my colleague how it was going, and he said, oh, well, they're finding this, this, and this, and this, and this, all of which we knew were there. And I said, well, that's great, so maybe something will get done. He said, actually, and the audit was being done, it was not an assessment, it was an audit. The audit was being done by one of the big, well, at that time it was the big six, now it's the big four, right? And it was being done by one of them, and I said, well, that's great, you're going to get some action. He said, well, actually, no. The issue has become, how do we change the audit to please the customer? Because if they don't change the audit, we're going to lose their business. So this is the corporate world without a mirror held up to it. And another story, another major corporation, once upon a time, an information security officer in a major corporation was told that their $1.5 million global intrusion detection system would have to be delayed for a year because of cutbacks. Okay. Next, a week later, that security professional in a major corporation was doing executive security at the Gala Partners Conference for all the executive directors of this major corporation in one of the great cities of Europe. And he was at the party, the opening night, and he said to somebody, how much did this party cost? Not the whole conference, which went on for several days and brought people in from all over the world and had many parties. What did this one party cost? $1.5 million. So there's all kinds of priorities in the world. So we did a study of governance and what constitutes consensus, what constitutes best practices for governance and governance of security and privacy. And we asked these questions of board of directors members from major corporations in the United States. And we did this study. It's online. It's free. You can find links to it in my text. Jody Westby, another distinguished fellow at Scilab, was the principal author, but I helped her with it. And it really revealed a lot of interesting data points. 56% only occasionally or rarely reviewed and approved top-level policies. Top-level policies. Rarely or only occasionally reviewed. 62% of them only occasionally or rarely received reports from senior managers regarding privacy and security risks. That means 62% of them only occasionally or rarely allowed that information security professional to get their 5 minutes in front of them. You can go through these and see for yourself some of the. These are fundamental, very important and useful tools to have a successful enterprise program. Do you have functional separation between privacy, security, and IT management? In other words, are all your privacy, information security, and information privacy issues addressed within IT? Or do they all report within IT to the CEO or under the CEO, or do they have some autonomy so that they can say, no, you really have to deal with this issue. We really have to look at this. 12%. Do you have cross-organizational teams? In other words, do the important people from legal and from security and from human resources and from IT and from audit work together cross-functionally, cross-organizational team to see that where you're going with your enterprise security and risk program and what you need to coordinate better. 73% of them, none of the above. So governance is a big issue, and you could have the best firewalls, you could have the best technology, you could have the best people from Purdue and Carnegie Mellon, and you could give them everything they needed. But if the only way a corporate culture changes is from the top. The only way a corporate culture changes from the top, because a corporation is not a democracy, it's not supposed to be. But a corporation is supposed to be a totalitarian state. Everything flows from the top. So if you change the boardroom, you change a corporation. If you don't change the boardroom, you haven't changed the corporation no matter what. These are some recommendations. Again, it's all in the study, and I commend it to you and its principal author, Jody Westby. And those, my comments and analysis on it are mine, not hers. She's much more diplomatic. So another issue I've been thinking a lot about is the relationship between cybersecurity and sustainability. And how I got here is that during my time with Deloitte, I was with Deloitte for 3 years, and I was Director of Global Security Intelligence. And so my job was really, one part of my job was helping roll out a global security organization, both physical and cyber, for all of Deloitte, which is 100,000 people and over 100,000 people in over 100 countries around the world. And another part of my job was looking at risk, and looking at risk from a security point of view and talking about it. And it was all internal. And so I started to look at the risk matrix, and I think because you're in an academic environment, there's several different risk matrices. There's different methodologies and everything else, and all very useful, don't get me wrong. But somebody asked me one, well, which risk matrix do you use? And this one or that one or this one and that one. I said, well, I use the Zen matrix. I don't really use a matrix. I just try to look at it and see what I see. And when I looked at the nature of risk, I saw that we have, first of all, cybersecurity, as important as it is to us. The top of your list is, nuclear proliferation, pandemics. There's all kinds of things on that list above the problems of cybersecurity. One issue, though, is that as cyber technology becomes more integrated into everything we do, the cybersecurity issues impact all your ability to deal with all those other risks, all the way up the top 10 list of the risks you have, whether you're a government, a family, an individual, or a business. But then when you look at climate change, and you accept that the science, no science is ever settled, but you accept that the science is settled, that there's something happening here, Mr. Jones, and we know what it is, then you have to acknowledge that this threat is going to warp every other threat. Just like cybersecurity issues impact your ability to deal with all the other threats, sustainability issues are going to warp all the other threats, accelerate, accentuate, aggravate many of these other threats. And in and of itself, it's a huge issue. And in climate, we talk about climate change because we talk about climate change or global warming, but really it's sustainability we're talking about. Even if the oceans weren't warming and the poles weren't melting in a way that was not has not happened before on this planet, then you would still have sustainability problems in terms of food, water, and everything else, but it aggravates them. So I was thinking, what does climate change is going to impact all of business. There was a study just came out this week, I think it was either 15% of the GDP, gross product of the world, GDP of the world, or 25% of the GDP of the world could take a hit. We're talking about now the geophysicists are looking at the impact, and I was asking people about this 6 or 7 years ago, and people didn't want to think about it. Now they're looking at the impact. Okay, the oceans are heating up. What's the impact on the crust? And what's the impact on the nature of earthquakes with climate change? This is a huge issue. So what does it have to do with cybersecurity, and what do C-level executives, boards of directors, and information security professionals and information security technologists have to know about it? I talked about this already, about how it warps all of these other issues, aggravates and accentuates and accelerates all of these other things. And there's about 7, another colleague of mine did a report where she analyzed and came up with 7 dimensions of risk, through which climate change impacts a corporation: financial, reputational, litigation, products, technology, supply chain, regulatory, and physical. She went through each one of these levels and explored how that would be. Yep.
Dimension of risk or information security risk?
Risk.
General
risk. Risk general. This is risk general. This is risk general. But then I took it to this place, and I said to myself, what is the role of cybersecurity? You know, it's funny. You're probably familiar with confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? I have a friend, Don Parker, a very brilliant man, who wrote a whole book about how confidentiality, integrity, and availability is a very limited model of what security is supposed to deliver. Cybersecurity is supposed to deliver, and actually there's about, I think he has one list where it's 5 and one list where it's 10 or 12 things that actually need to be addressed by cybersecurity. But let's just stick with the conventional wisdom of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Most of our efforts have been spent over the last 20 years focusing on confidentiality and integrity. Can we preserve the secrecy of information, keep it from being stolen, or keep it from being changed? Some work has gone into availability, but it has not been the driver. But in a world where energy issues and sustainability issues become paramount, availability, the nature of availability changes completely. For example, if the disaster recovery model, disaster recovery and business continuity are integral, IT is integral to them, and in most organizations, it's usually IT that either drives disaster recovery, business continuity, or is a central player in it, right? So the 20th century model of disaster recovery and business continuity is, do we have a plan? Oh yeah, you go over to your shelf, pull it off the shelf, you dust it off, it's about this thick, and you pop it on the ground, and you say, this is what we're going to do if anything bad ever happens. Oh yeah, we test it every 6 months. Here it is. We brought people in from the outside. We've done it. Thud factor is important. But the 20th century model of disaster recovery says something bad is going to happen someday. No, something bad may happen someday. And if it does, here's what we'll do. But the 21st century model of disaster recovery and business continuity, because of terrorism, because of pandemics, because of climate change, because of so many other issues, but in particular climate change and sustainability issues. I mean, we're now living in a world where there are tornadoes in downtown Atlanta. That has not happened in the history of Atlanta. So the 21st century model of disaster recovery and business continuity, I propose, should be multiple bad things are going to happen. And here is how we are going to adapt and continue. It's different. Multiple things are going to happen, perhaps simultaneously. And this is how we will adapt. Because it's really about adaptation at this point, and flexibility and mobility, and it's different. It's a different world. So I developed this checklist, and I put it out in CSO magazine. I write for them every other month. And it's a checklist I propose a corporate security strategy for climate change and sustainability. It's a big issue. Okay. We've got an hour, right? That's what we're talking about? No, I mean, till 5:30.
No, till 5. Till 5:20.
Oh, good, fine, we're fine.
7 more minutes.
Good. So, let's go to the movies very briefly. So, it occurred to me, when Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, our collective consciousness, our collective unconscious, we had to process a lot of grief and fear about atomic weapons. And the Japanese produced Godzilla and Mothra and all these movies about radioactive monsters that came from the sea and destroyed the cities, and then humanity had to fight back, and then there were radioactive ants coming out of giant ants coming out of the sewers in Los Angeles, and some U.S. versions of the same phenomena of the human psyche trying to get its mind around the nuclear age through cinema and process its fear. And so then I was thinking about, well, how do we relate to cybersecurity, to cyber risk? And, well, how do we relate to the information age in our cinema? And it became very interesting because all of them had The Matrix, a world taken over by computers in where humans are used as batteries, and you have to take the red pill or the blue pill and unplug yourself, and then you fight the machines, and then at the end there's peace between man and machines. Terminator, another computer system gone crazy, destroying the human race. Blade Runner, in which detectives hunt down androids who are barely, almost imperceptibly different than humans because they rose up on their off-world colonies. And 2001, where the on-board supercomputer rebels against the astronauts, has a psychotic breakdown when they're in space. And War Games, in which a juvenile hacker breaks into a Pentagon system thinking it's this incredibly cool game, which it partly is, and touches off the potential of a nuclear war. So, God, what's beyond this? What's beyond this kind of primitive fear of the cyber? What does it all mean, and what are we looking at? And then just quickly, 3 stories that came to me recently. This is something that they put up in the MIT Museum. Have any of you seen this? You can do this online. Have you done it? And you can get yourself in a barcode, or get the Googled version of yourself, a search engine version of yourself in a barcode. I saw many things fly by about myself, and then I saw many things that were not about me, but were about somebody else named Richard Power, and it all ends up in a barcode at the end. It's an artwork, but it really tells something about where we're going. And then there's Twitter. This is an excellent piece in the Huffington Post by a great writer, Peter Dow, who wrote this after some of the Twitter's involvement in what's happening in Iran and what was happening in China and other things, and what's happening here in our political debates, and how Twitter, he says, ongoing process of pouring the contents of hundreds of millions of minds into a global cyber canvas, and really looking at that we're talking about a mass stream of consciousness, and where everybody's stream of consciousness is accessible to everybody else on Twitter, and then something evolves out of that, which is something like, which has an existence of its own. It's a different world. And then, did anybody see the 60 Minutes episode? 60 Minutes episode about a technology. I know that there's a video on the web of them doing incredible things with monkeys and in computer brain interfaces. These are people with a scientist with an extraordinary injury, and now he can communicate through his thoughts. Like his, and communicate and have his words and thoughts come out on the computer in words or sound that other people can understand. And there's this very funny quote. It's an extraordinary story, and it's part of our future. It's part of our near future. And that there's this great moment in it. Now I can imagine some people watching this interview are thinking to themselves, wait a minute, they're connecting the brain to a computer. Are we moving in the direction of reading people's thoughts? Is this mind control around the corner? No, it's not. It's certainly not mind control. It's different from reading other people's thoughts. It's important to realize this. Well, that's true. Of course, it's not what they're doing. They're providing incredible capability to people that will change a lot. But it has implications. It absolutely has implications. Even this much has implications. But you, as people who sit around and think about security and risk, could sit down with this concept and come up with some very interesting challenges and very interesting points of contemplation about our near future. So if you remember the drawing I did in the beginning of the global economy and cyberspace, and how in the 21st century it's really, they occupy the same space. I look at the physical and the psychological and the cyber. I mean, in the 20th century they kind of met. We touched the keyboard. The keyboard touches us. Our minds and our thoughts are hopefully intersect. But with the computer world, we touch, we meet, like at the borders. But in the early 21st century, as you see from that 60 Minutes documentary, they're already interpenetrating all three. And probably by mid-21st century, many of the issues that we project in our creative imagination in those mythical movies are the kinds of issues we'll be dealing with. So the question is, what is the answer? The barcode, yourself as a barcode in that MIT museum experiment, that shows that we're redefining identity in the information age. And the piece about the Twitter is pointing us to the fact that we're redefining consciousness in the information age. And the 60 Minutes documentary shows us that we're redefining being in the information age. There are people in this lifetime who will be the first people who will have muscular dystrophy sufferers who will basically be part robot. That will happen in their lifetime. And at the same time, we have people who are communicating from their brains through computer directly. So in a space where security is always running from behind, we're always running from behind. The black hat finds a vulnerability, the white hat runs to defeat it. Some new application is deployed, the security runs to try to do what it can to mitigate risk that's created by that application. Security is always behind but if we can somehow redefine what we understand security to be, like we're redefining, identity is being redefined, consciousness is being redefined, being is being redefined. Security professionals and technologists need to ask themselves, how do we need to redefine what security is? Has it got to be a different concept than keeping things out, keeping things in, drawing lines, padlocks? How many padlocks have you seen in how many security advertisements, some marketing campaigns? A padlock has about as much to do with cybersecurity in the 21st century as, I don't know, a dead fish, a rock, maybe less. So here's a concept from the world of the Tao, the wisdom of insecurity. Maybe the way to real security is to understand that there is no such thing as absolute security, and deal with our security challenges from a place that's more fluid and more moving. And then just a thought from the world of physics and biology. They're looking in quantum physics. We know from the experiment that the beam going through the holes in the piece of cardboard, and the choices that are made, and how perception changes what you experience, how perception changes what happens. And biologists are looking at this in the same way. Now, I'm speaking purely metaphorically here, but what does that tell us about how we look at security? Not from technology, but from inside the human psyche. What role does the human psyche have in creating a new model of security? So I talk about having a beginner's mind and kind of starting fresh with some of these things rather than, I'll leave you with this thought. So I had a friend, Marcus Renham, he was one of the fathers of the firewall, and in the 1990s he said to me, network security is like trying to change the hull of a ship while you're at sea. How do you do it? Well, that was true. It was true then. Now, at this point in time, that was before wireless. At this point in time, you might as well just say, give a Zen answer. There is no ship, there is no sea. You have to find a whole new way of looking at this problem, because you cannot change the hull of a ship at sea. So this is really a talk of open questions rather than answers. And I'd be very suspicious of answers because things are moving too fast. It's about an attitude, an approach, a great attitude towards our work, kind of different. So, I will end it there. 3 minutes over. I hope that's okay. Questions or comments? Sir?
You didn't mention the mother of all risk, the loss of credibility of world reserve currency. And that's going to affect everything, all these relationships. And how do you look at that one?
Say it for me again.
How do you look at the risk of credibility of losing the world reserve currency?
Yes.
That means there is nothing, the common thread is going to be gone. So
Yeah.
everything is holding everything together is that.
Yeah, I have no argument with that. It's a major. The whole. You could go on a whole other. We could go on a whole other tangent about the economic implications and issues, and even the cyber dimensions of that problem, and undermining the credibility. I mean, they've done a good job of undermining it themselves. But if somebody was creative about it, willful about it, it could be interesting. But you bring up a very big point.
And so how do you say project, how long it takes? Because we are just at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Say, within how many years? Or some people may say how many months. When you look at the risk,
I wouldn't want to venture a guess on that. Hopefully, we won't have to find out. Something else?
Yeah, you just talked about redefining security, right? And there was like this saying, like, let the water flow. The
Yes.
water should not stagnate.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned that security is, there is nothing like absolute security.
Right.
So so I was like kind of curious how to redefine security. Is that something like security is never, it's never a destination, it's always a process? That's how we redefine it, or
Well,
how do you redefine it? Like,
Right. That would be certainly an important that would be certainly an important message. What you just said, that it's a process, not an end state, if you were. And that will always be true. And then when I say redefining them, I also suggest to not be so urgent about getting a set definition, but like look at it in a different way, like you say, as a process. But I'll give you two examples. There are people working on research about how to, within an insecure environment, within an insecure network, how do you create pockets of security? Temporary, movable pockets of security within a context that's always changing, and that you can't certify the trustworthiness of. That's on a technological side. That's one thing. That maybe if you can't secure your whole network because your whole network's connected to everything else in the world, and you don't want it to be otherwise, because that's the way business flows and culture flows now. But you want to be able to say, for this hour, or for this day, or for this project, I want to create a different level of, and how do I do that within an open and insecure environment? That's a technological one. On another side is the human factor. What if security were about what does Twitter do? Twitter makes, the NFL says, you can't, to its players, you can't talk to the press. Maybe you heard this today on ESPN. But you can't talk to the press on this day or this day, before the game, after, whatever. But, okay, so I didn't talk to the press, coach. Nobody Twittered, right? And so all the press and anybody else has to do is read his Twitters. So that's new media. New media changes everything. So, and there are various other ways in which social networking applications are changing the way that we communicate, and will eventually change the way in which we do business and everything else. Maybe it'll change the way in which we do security. By that I mean not so much the applications, but the mindset of empowering the individual. Twitter, Facebook, all these things empower the individual, right? But what if we can empower the individual to make risk analysis, personal risk analysis, a part of the way they approach? Like you make diet. What I do with my diet is a choice that I make. What I do with, and the more informed you get, the healthier you are. Likewise with this. What if security were something that wasn't about fear and exclusion and control, but about, security is really about love. You want to protect the things you love. Maybe it's your money. Maybe you love your money. You want to protect that. Whatever it is. Maybe you want to protect your children. Whatever it is, you want to protect it. That's really the deepest motivation of security. If you can change that mindset in people, you have a different kind of user, a different kind of software designer. Just two ideas. Anything else? You've been very patient and very kind. You could have thrown your chairs at me or walked out at least 15, 20 minutes ago. Thank you.
Let's thank our guest speaker.